what's wrong with somebody loving
Right.
their spouse that way?
Yeah.
Where they are still young and active, like young in their love, I should
Yeah.
say, because they can be older, but still young in their love, where it looks like they're first dating, but they've been together 40, 50 years, whatever the case may be. Like,
Let it be us.
yes, in Jesus' name. Like, but why are we like that as a society where it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're old, you're this. Like, no, let them be young in love and enjoy that process and continue to live that life, because I think that's what has stopped that, where they can look like that everything's there, but they don't fully show it because of society, and they're like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be that person. Like,
I won't be that person.
Well, we already are. I was just about to say that. Like, we don't care.
I like to be that person.
Yeah, we don't care.
Hi.
All right, welcome everybody to our next episode. It's from beta to masculinity, biblical masculinity, that is.
Key.
Very key. Where should we start? How do we want to kick this off?
Okay, so a couple things with that is, I think just you sharing, obviously, what that journey looks like for you, and the fact that I don't even like saying that like you were a beta.
It's the reality, though.
And
the
then
authenticity.
Yeah. And I guess for the record, the other part of that is I had a boss babe season in my life, so I get it, you know. And there's different reasons, like for that, and sometimes we can be influenced into beta or boss babe, and sometimes we can be, it's unhealed trauma, it could be influences, right? So obviously we're going to talk about those things. So it can go all the way back to the example you had, right? For men in your life, and for women, it's the women that we had in our life and the men we had in our life that make a difference. So if you were just to give a short suite, though, people are like, well, what's a beta? What's a biblical man? Like, what is the difference between those two, so they can have a general idea? Which I know can be a whole podcast in itself.
Well, yeah.
Short, sweet.
There's so many different definitions, as you and I've heard over through different podcasts that we listen to.
For sure.
A beta to me is a passive aggressive man. That's not standing for what he believes in, and is a yes man, or a nice man, I should say, and is a doormat to people. And then biblical masculinity, you're living in the image of Christ and who we are bared to live by, and following that as much as we can. Obviously, we're never going to be exactly like Christ to the perfection, but we can strive for that and live for that, and you know when to be aggressive and when it's needed, and to be that the machismo man, not the red pill, like, but truly knowing what and how to act, but then at the same time you can be a kind man. And there's a difference between kind and nice, and you're still assertive and you still have the grounds that you stand on, but you can still be kind to people and just not be walked all over on a daily basis. And that's pretty much how I live my life, as a nice man and a yes man, and wanting to be a people pleaser, until I finally seen that change. That wasn't okay. Reading, no more Mr. Nice Guy, no more Christian Mr. Nice Guy as well. So there was just a lot that I had to do to get me out of that phase and that process. But not only through books, but work that I put in for myself as well.
Don't you think, though, also, unfortunately, we didn't really talk about discussing this, but we talk about it often, is like, unfortunately, even in Christian culture, there's this like passive emasculating, like, feminine Jesus, feminine men, even in the church, which is like crazy, unless you actually go to more traditional and you look at like Orthodox churches, and you look at Reformed churches, and you look at what's another? We were talking about this, like a culture, like Armenian.
Yes.
And you look at
but
that.
I think they're Orthodox.
Yeah, I think
Armenians
so too.
are more Orthodox.
So you look at that, and they hold those traditional values, which I think that even gets tricky in trad community, because there's like trad and red pilled, but then there's the biblical side of it, and not all trad and not all masculinity or femininity is biblical.
Right.
And so that's the part that gets kind of tricky, because a lot of that like over spiritualization and manifesting and like whatever new age crap, but they try to like make it trad, right?
Well,
like is ridiculous too.
Going to that point, like we see churches preaching prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it starts from, is because, everything's going to be okay. It's all nice and fine and dandy.
Right.
But at the same time, like, Jesus was a victor, a conqueror, and a king.
Right.
Like, he wasn't just some effeminate guy that was passive and passive aggressive at that.
Yeah.
Like, he knew when to bring the wrath, but at the same time, he knew that women knew. And in that time, women didn't come around them.
Yeah.
But women knew that they can come to him.
Yeah.
And wash his feet with their hair and their tears. Like,
yeah.
If you want the safest man to, like, your mentor, who to look up to, there's no other, like, being or man to look to because of that. Like, who else can live in that life and in that era, yet have women come to him and feel that safety and that security, and knew that they would be safe and protected, even amongst a group of other men being present.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and Jesus obviously embodied truly all those things. Obviously, he's the only sinless, perfect, human and God. But I think him embodying that, whether, he was a warrior, but he wept. There's all these dual things happening, which I think is the embodiment. And something that I tell you, which is one of my favorite things about you, is I'm like, it's the gentleman wolf.
Yeah.
That is like, there's this, you can be compassionate and gentle, but then you can still be protecting and dominating in healthy ways.
Right.
And that's the thing, is that every characteristic, every single thing has a healthy side and has a dark side.
Yes, for sure.
So there's that. And actually, I want to ask you this before we forget, because I'm sure that there's men listening that are like, okay, well, who are people that are actually exemplifying this? And obviously, we're trying to be an example in that space, especially in the Christian Spirit-filled community. But like, what are some of the podcasts or books or pages that you did follow in the beginning of your journey, you're following now, that you feel like have ignited and aligned with biblical masculinity?
Well, starting back from the following, how it started was more red pill.
Yeah.
But that was prominent on social media.
For
was
sure.
a red pill masculinity space and all these red pill men.
Yeah.
So like the Andrew Tates and all that, like, definitely got into that. And that kind of started that process of like, okay, don't be the nice guy.
Yeah.
And that really honed in on that for me, to not be the guy that was just walked all over. The way I walked into a room. And the crazy thing about it is, once you start to live that way, and you can see how you can affect a room when you walk in, if you're in that space, is powerful in itself. Like, for men to be able to just walk in a room and everybody's like a magnet to you, and everybody turns, and like, where you're just not like some dude just freaking walking with your head down, shoulders down, like, it's crazy, like how that can change things for you and your mindset. So started there, more the red pill community. Now there's the Forming Men podcast that I listen to. I wish they'd have a new episode. I've been missing them for a little bit.
Yeah.
But then also Finding Awakened Church down in San Diego. They're big. Pastor Jerg's big.
Yeah.
I just bought his book.
Yeah.
Gonna read that. Started reading it. Dr. Tony Evans, The Kingdom Man, and I have my devotional that I read every day, that I share with you sometimes when they're just good things, like this morning. And then Steve Weatherford, he actually did a sermon at Awakened Church about, it's called Wake Up Champion, and he's got a book called Wake Up Champion, where he, his story that I just bought as well. Gonna be reading that. And then Dr. Matt, I can't think of his last name. He's actually from Awakened Church. So Awakened Church has been a huge impact in my life lately.
Yeah.
As in this season, and then going back to looking at when we talked about like what churches I was going to initially when we first started talking to them.
Right.
I was going to Valley.
Yeah.
And Pastor Jeremy White had a phenomenal message on Father's Day of 23, so last year, that talked about biblical masculinity, and that really sparked, I think, the biblical side of things for me to get down that path even more so, and just like accelerated everything for me.
Yeah. What was that other podcast though that was this pastor? You wouldn't think he was all biblical masculine, just because again people think that it's a look. It's not a look. It's an energy. It's the same with femininity. You could be playing sports. You could be
was it one that I
without makeup as a woman, right? And like you could still be feminine. And just because you're in a dress and cooking doesn't make you feminine. Just as because men maybe they look more preppy doesn't mean they're not masculine. And just because they ride a Harley and have tattoos doesn't make them masculine. So it was like a Facebook group for marriage and men, and then he had a podcast. We listened to it on the way to football.
I'm trying to find it.
He had some good podcasts that I think were super foundational about for men that want to lead in their marriages, they want to lead in their community. That was like a really good biblical perspective. And he's pretty strong in that. I feel like it was something with an anchor.
It's a captain.
Okay,
it's been the captain.
See how my brain works?
Yeah. You do have a brain that will always bring us back
to
where we
through.
need to be.
The brain comes through.
Why is it not coming up on my thing?
Okay, well, we'll find that and we'll drop it into the show notes. How about that? Okay, so let's go all the way back for your influences, childhood, teenagers, young adult, obviously, the example in marriage or with your dad or in the military, like not seeing biblical men and how that impacted you.
Well, I honestly can say going back to like childhood, I didn't have anybody really to look up to. My dad he's phenomenal. He's a great person.
Right.
But he was out of the house. He worked 6-7 days a week. Like he gave me that work ethic of a man to go out and provide and do all those things. Mm-hmm. But as far as like how I should be and how I should act as a man, that wasn't portrayed in the home, or even outside of the home. Like we talked about this before, and I was like, oh, man, I didn't have anybody to look up to. That's like, this is somebody that I can definitely look at and who I want to be like when I'm older. So yeah, I didn't really have anything there. I had a cousin that I looked up to, but he was gone for the military. He left for the military, and that's why I ended up joining too. So I didn't really see how that was supposed to be, or how a man was supposed to be. I got the machismo, like go join the military, do the things, like go out and provide, but never understood how to provide at home and being present, being loving, being caring. And just being still when that time comes, like with our situation right now, what we go through, and there's days where you just need me to show up. I didn't know that. Like this is something that I've had to learn and watch and grow into, to where it's like, cool, I know how to just be. And sometimes they say this in the business world and everything else, like don't be the smartest person in the room. For me, it's like don't be the loudest person in the room as well. Like just shut up sometimes, because that's all that's needed. Like I don't know what it's like, butterfly. I don't know what it's like to have to go through that process.
Yeah.
So what words can I really say other than I love you and I got you and I'm here for you? But aside from that, like I just want to be there for you.
Yeah.
And Matt has said this before. I don't know if we mentioned it, but I think it was Matt. It was either him or somebody else that was on a podcast with him. Women need to feel secure more than they actually need the security. So it's a sense of feeling it rather than actually having the security. So when you feel secure and safe is when you can fall into your femininity side and just be as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the polarity side of things would not be working, and we'd be completely opposites.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any of that growing up. I didn't have mentors. I had a great supervisor in the military, again, but I didn't get to see him with his family ever.
Yeah.
We were in Iraq, and he was, even though he was a supervisor in his rank, like he wasn't supposed to be mopping the floors or doing all these things with us, but he always did, and we had to fight to take things away from him because we had so much respect for him. That's the kind of, like, for me, I was like, I want to be that kind of leader where people respect me enough to where like, hey, look, you've been doing this, you don't need to.
Right.
So I learned traits of that, but never really put it into practice. I would say in the biblical sense, it was just more of myself because I wasn't following Christ or knowing, and I didn't know the things that I know now.
Yeah.
As well.
Which is kind of interesting because there's obviously men that can have all the trad values, all the masculine things, and be raised with a man, right? A dad, a grandpa, an uncle, a coach, whoever it is, that they see leading and they see that is, you know, a kind man and not just a nice man. And then they don't have Christ. And that always baffles me because I'm like, these are biblical values. But there is a lot of men out there. Some of them go extreme new age, but I'm like, there still are masculine men that are in traditional values, which could be a culture thing. It could be their own family thing, you know, but I'm like, that's crazy that they can have that without Christ, without Holy Spirit. But then you have Christians that have a Bible and have Holy Spirit and have small groups and have church, but yet they are not leading in their marriage. They're not leading their kids, you know? And so I'm always like, wow, that's crazy that sometimes people in the world can get these biblical concepts and things.
But I think that lends to more culture, and I think certain religions, like we said, you can go back to Orthodox, and like Catholicism is rooted in traditional values as well.
Yeah.
I think with Christianity and like seeing non-denominational churches primarily is the prosperity gospel and the effeminate of Christ. Like, we don't really hear about the hard times and what the wrath and the wars and the land that he conquered and all the suffering that Christ did while he was here on earth. Like, it's not flipping tables in the synagogues. Like, we don't hear about that often enough. And on top of that, I don't think there's enough men's ministries where men will actually show up to because of this is just my thought. Like, it leads to that effeminate of Christ where they're like, man, I don't want to come in here. Like, nobody's powerful. Nobody's coming after it. Like, it's just kind of, hey, let's just sit back and, you know. Whereas women go and they show up in groves when they have women's like ministries and events and conferences, but to get a man there is hard. Other than looking at what Awakened Church does and who they bring in, they bring men in groves, and that's why I've been drawn to it, is because they do have that attraction for somebody that wants to be a biblical masculine man. Like, you want that? Like, I don't go there. We don't live in San Diego, but I'm telling you that church, I watch a sermon a day, and it's just been phenomenal for my walk. And who I want to be, not only for myself, but for us and our family, and then our community.
Yeah, for sure. And there are ones. Another one that's pretty cool is Brave Men Co. out of Bethel Church. I do know that they've really been hitting on traditional family, masculinity. Danny Silk just released a book on
another one I'll have to buy.
On men who lead, and I do think there is a movement, right? Because we understand the collapse of society is really in part because of weak men. You know, and so I think that it's like, oh shoot, look what's happened, and we even saw that over 2020 and that whole little situation of life that we all lived was like, where's the men? You know, like, and where's the men?
Well, let's talk about that era. Even for me, because I was still in that beta phase. It wasn't until then that I started to open my eyes, and I was like, and I saw a lot of things in the military with corruption and stuff like that. Like, probably I'm gonna get canceled for saying that, but oh well. That definitely opened my eyes to see things. And to walk me out of that phase to where I was like, cool, I need to start learning something and opening my eyes to all these things, because there's so much more. You might see a surprise guy pop out here shortly.
Yeah, which is true. And so you go back to also a big part, like you would say, and I think a lot of men would probably say this, like, if you didn't have Christ, like, without Holy Spirit, without Christ, like, you don't really have the conviction, you don't really have the revelation, though there's people that do but I don't think you can find one man outside of Christ that's living those things that didn't have a man in his life, a grandpa, an uncle, a dad, a coach. Do you know what I mean? They're like, it's because of this thing. And so if you don't have that, and then you don't have Christ, I think then you look at our society and you're like, wow, that's all just the way to be. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's just so much. And we see that people say over the time, like, man, people have become soft, right? Like, even my oldest son, he talks about his own generation, which is in their 20s, and he's like, we're doomed if my generation is going to be responsible for something. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And it's like with each generation, it's getting softer and softer. But whose fault is that really? Is it the generation's fault, or is it the parenting? Is it the grandparenting? Is it the church? Right, exactly. So it's like, it's not ultimately that generation's fault. No. It's truly the generation above them's fault. And obviously there's a lot of entitlement. There's a lot of parents outside the home. So these kids are just, latchkey kids and raising themselves and don't have present parents. Obviously church attendance is a total part of that.
Just like what we were talking about yesterday when I told you about, when I posted that reel with Dr. Matt from Awaken Church. He said that it's biblically sound and there's biblical principles that we're supposed to leave 3 generations of wealth for our kids.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. It starts also with the leadership and who they are. Like, we have to instill in the next generation so that they know and instill that for generations to come.
Yeah.
But we've been failed in our generation where we continue to fail.
Yeah.
And it's like and people I think just were like, oh, well, that's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
No, like, take the stand and make a change. Like,
yeah.
You don't like it.
Yeah.
Then figure out a solution to make this change happen. Like, I've had supervisors tell me that, like, don't just come with me with problems. Like, if you don't like it, come to me with a solution as well.
Right.
So then we can try to fix it.
Yeah.
But if you're just gonna come and be like, and whine and cry, you're a beta. Like, you have no intention for anything else. You just want to whine and cry and play victim.
Right.
As opposed to, hey, let's figure this out and get a solution to where we can make it better or change it. At least without just being like,
right.
Be a problem solver.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other part of all of this, is we know the school system sucks. Like, it's like so many parts of the system are playing into all of this. And the other side of it, which I think is on women, but it's also a society issue, is feminism. Feminism is playing a huge role into emasculating men, into destroying marriages, and all these women that are putting careers over family and boss babe culture. And so I don't want to just pin everything on society and dads and men and church, which those are all real, but I do think that feminism plays a role.
It does, but like you said earlier, it comes at the fall of man.
Right, because the man is the head of the household.
Well, that, and if we take it all the way back biblically, Adam stood passively to the serpent and Eve and just let that happen.
Right.
And then who did Christ call for? He called for Adam.
For sure.
So, like, ultimately it's the fall of man. Like, yes, everything else.
Right.
But if it wasn't for us and we didn't fail in that manner, then we wouldn't have to worry about feminism. We wouldn't have to worry about all these things. Because we'd have strong men actually leading. So at the end of the day, like, yes, all that plays a role, but it's because we failed as men to lead and to do these things.
Yeah.
And stand against that and not be passive to it. And we're just like, oh, let live and let love. Like, no. It's a movement, and this is just slowly, you give them an inch, they're taking a mile.
Yeah.
Like, that door has swung open.
Right.
And they're just walking through. It's a carousel door where they're just flapping back and forth, and they're going to find something new. You stop this, well, let me go find this, because we haven't had strong leaders leading our country, leading our cities, leading our communities, leading our churches.
Right.
Like, it comes at the end of the day, no matter what, it does fall on us as men.
Yeah.
Like,
it's true. I mean, there's like so many factors, and then even just thinking about, like, you also could have you could have gone into a marriage as a biblical masculine man, and then this feminist type of woman, boss babe woman, she's gonna break you down over time. And you may be strong enough to override that, but I feel like I see more and more that men are just like, you know what, I don't want to fight, I don't want to just have it your way, whatever you want to do, and it's like, it doesn't mean it happens overnight, but like, I've seen that in people. Or opposite, you show up in a marriage as a biblical feminine woman, you want your person to lead, you want to be submitted, and then that person's like, I want you to be masculine. Do you know what I mean? And they put all this...
Should you be getting into a marriage without knowing these things first?
But it happens. Because it's happened to both of us.
It has.
So
You're right.
We're here to say, learn from us. But
you're right. You're absolutely right in that sense.
Okay.
But I guess now, if you know in your mind that this is what you want already, I didn't know these things.
Sure.
Like, I didn't know then. But now I do, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to settle. And you said this in your last podcast.
Right.
Don't settle.
Right.
Because if you know your values and know what you want, you won't fall into that space.
True.
Like, but it takes you knowing yourself and the self-awareness to be like, this is not what I want. This is not going to work for me and my future family and and what I have going on. So, like, don't even get into that marriage.
Yeah.
But there's also where you come into the marriage like this.
What if you just didn't know?
And it's just polarity, but everything's there, and then it just flips on you. Like, then what? Right? Because that can happen too.
Then you get remarried.
This is true. They're just playing, so just up. Bye. No, but like, it can happen as well that way.
And I don't mean to say that flippantly. People understand, but yeah.
But yeah, you can come into it that way and think everything's going to be fine, and
because people have free will.
Yeah, you dated and you did all these things, and you're like, cool, this is everything matches. Yeah. Values, all that, everything comes together. So what do you do in that sense? Other than, obviously, you're supposed to fight for your marriage, and you're not supposed to get divorced if there's no abuse and everything else, as you always mention too. Yeah. Like,
hopefully you can switch that, and people do. Like, people will be at that brink, and what's usually wrong is they don't have the polarity. It's like, oh my gosh, what happened to us, right? And you look at, like, I think about a page about the couple, I think his name is Amir, Odyssey to Odin, and that was them. They were like, we were married this long, DDD, and then they were just going to be destroyed, but it was like they realized they were inverted. But they went into it with all these values, but then it's like at some point that just isn't enough.
Right.
You know, and it's like, what is wrong here? And there isn't addiction or abuse or affairs, you know, or abandonment. It's just there isn't polarity, so there's inversion. So then it's like we've talked about, you have to reverse engineer that, and now you each have to go do your own work, because as much as it's like you could say, hey, I'm going to do all the feminine communication, I'm going to be soft, I'm going to be open, you're saying I'm going to lead, I'm going to make sure you feel safe. That's only one part of it, because we still have to go back and heal our past traumas. We still have to go look at our attachment styles and be like, oh, this is because I'm anxious attached, or this is because I'm codependent, or this is, a lot of it is not even ultimately about us. Yeah. It's about our childhood. It's about our past relationships. And so I think that's a beautiful thing if a couple can say, hey, we're recognizing like we're not where we want to be, and like something just isn't clicking. Yeah. And so it's like, we both have work to do, but we're committed to doing the work. And yeah, we're going to have to reverse engineer this. And as a woman, I'm going to have to like step back.
But you said a key word in there, and that was committed. Both parties have to be committed to doing the work and understanding through that reverse engineering that it's going to take time. Yeah. And we were kind of talking about this before we started recording. I read it earlier today, and one of my devotionals from Dr. Tony Evans is the same thing. Yeah. Where it's like, as a man, it's going to take time if you have to reverse engineer that and go back into your biblical manhood and masculinity side. But at the same time, like, as the spouse, you kind of have to give grace for that and allow that process to happen without having a wall up and be like, oh, I'm just going to go back to the same thing, because then you will never see what that person's actually doing. Mm-hmm. You will never see the work, because all you're going to be focused on is their past and what they already did, as opposed to the new things that they're being and who they are now and who they're becoming. Right. You have to have that opportunity and that vision to be able to see that, and the open eyes to be able to see that without, and lift that veil from yourself, because you can put that up and be like, yeah, they're this, and never let that person change. Yeah. Outside of those 4 A's.
For sure. Well, and that's the part, is like you said, it does take commitment, because it won't work if it's just one person. No. And do I believe that we should give people chances? We should fast, we should pray, we should take communion, we should fight for our marriage, even if that person is away from Christ, even if that person is like, no, I don't want to do that type of work, you know, whatever. But at some point, I do think this is where pastors come into play and therapists come into play, because each situation is unique and individual and different. But I do believe that God wants us to be in biblical, healthy marriages. Oh, yeah. And that it's biblical, healthy marriages and families that are going to change the world. And when people see people, it's like we talk about, like when we go places in public, like I personally I don't really see a lot of couples that I'm like, oh, look at them. And I understand people are in their day-to-day life. We don't always look like a romance novel every single day. Actually, I don't know.
So far we do. I hope that never changes.
I hope so too. But in general, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then it's like, what's sad to me is when you see a couple that looks like they're polarized. We don't know the ins and out, but when you can just tell they're connected or whatever that is, you're like, oh, but it's like, wow, how sad that doesn't seem as common. Do you know what I mean?
And that could be society.
Right.
Because society sees them, they're like, oh, go get a room. Like,
go get a room, but 8 out of 10 people are addicted to porn. So we can't handle real love, pure love.
Right.
But, okay, got it.
Yeah, it's like, what's wrong with somebody loving their spouse that way?
Yeah.
Where they are still young and active, like young in their love, I should say, because they can be older, but still young in their love, where it looks like they're first dating, but they've been together 40, 50 years, whatever the case may be. Like,
let it be us.
Yes. In Jesus' name. Like, but why are we like that as a society where it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're old, you're this. Like, no, let them be young in love and enjoy that process and continue to live that life, because I think that's what has stopped that, where they can look like everything's there, but they don't fully show it because of society, and they're like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be that person. Like,
I won't be that person.
Well, we already are. I was just about to say that. Like, we don't care.
I like to be that person.
Yeah, we don't care. And we talk about it. We talked about it yesterday when we were filming our videos for the coffee and everything too. Like, if you don't like it, God made us this way.
Yeah.
Like, that's why we're completely opposites and polarized.
Yeah.
Because of that. Like, there was a purpose. And so we as a society need to stop shaming people for loving each other.
Yeah.
Biblically, and loving each other through that process. Like, let people be young in love.
Yeah. And letting people be, I think that's the other part of it, is like being submitted to a man is very frowned upon in these days. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, you're gonna, isn't that controlling? Remember, I've had people message me, they're like, oh, he
told you to go to bed at 9?
Oh yeah, he told you to go to bed at 9. I was like, okay, but like in a healthy way, like this is our lifestyle. And so yeah, but it's like, even in that nowadays where people are just like, oh, submission is like a bad word. You know what I mean? And it's like, no, this is biblical. And, or, oh, you let him make the decisions. You know what I mean? It's like all this feminism BS, you know? And I think, again, that goes to our society, which is degenerate, unfortunately. And the more we move away from God, the more we move away from biblical design, which is polarity. And that we do need each other, and that we are uniquely designed and made, and there's a purpose for each of those things. But it's like, unfortunately, whether that is upbringing or culture or wounding or pain, because I know for me, going from a biblical woman, and I still was in church and biblical, it's just I had a boss babe era, was like, unfortunately, a lot of women are pushed into that, right? And so when we don't have polarity and we don't have biblical masculinity, what are we left to do? We're just like, I gotta lead, I gotta do the things, you know what I mean? So we don't want to, though.
Right.
That's the reality. Like, we don't like it. We don't want to, like, at all. We want to be soft. We want to be surrendered. We want to be protected and cherished and relaxed and rested and nourished.
Yes. I got one thing, going back to like the way you said we are created. Like, this was said at, I think either one of my men's groups or at camp. One of the guys was like, do you realize that we're the only creation on earth that God actually formed us? Like it's talked about in the Bible, where he formed man from dirt and everything, and then breathed in air into his lungs. So he breathed life into us. When he talks about the animals and all that, he doesn't talk about that. We're the only beings on earth that he actually did that for. He created us for a purpose and a reason. And as helpmates to each other. Like, why don't we allow what God created to be what God created? And for us to be helpmates and to let us live together and love together. Like you're saying, with all this with society, and they're like, oh, this and that, and like feminism, and then pushing. We are created for a purpose and to live together in unison through that. Like, we are the only beings on earth that actually had life and air breathed into them, yet we're life suckers of people. We take that from them. And why do we do that as society? Is that the fall of man as well? Like, falling into them, we're like, oh, nope, let people live and let love, like kind of thing.
Well, and I think it just goes to people don't want to take personal responsibility. That's like just so much. I feel like just so much falls on personal responsibility. Do you know what I mean? Whether you're single, you're married, it doesn't matter. Like you're an athlete, you're not your business owner. It doesn't matter. Personal responsibility. I just like, again, people do not want. They always want to look for someone to blame, someone to say it's because of this. And even with all this, with Boss Babe or Beta, it's like, oh, it's because my parents, it's because of my ex, it's because of whatever. They're a part of it.
Yeah.
But the reality is we have our journey, we have free will, right? And sometimes it is lack of knowledge, right? Like we didn't know what we didn't know.
Oh, that was me.
Right.
And now, like, it's funny because I'm thinking to myself right now in my head, like, everything I've said is because of somebody else or something that I read.
Right.
And it's like, but it got me to where I need to be. And sometimes people don't have that accountability to be able to do the work for themselves and to read things, to learn, be like, oh, I need this, and to take it in,
right,
and actually learn that information for themselves and bring, like, know to be able to give back and to speak that word.
Yeah.
That it's living in you to be able to live it out every day.
Yeah, and that's the key part, though. I think that so many people want to learn and read and have the knowledge, but application of knowledge is really where the sweet spot is, and that's with anything, right?
Well,
that's
knowledge
business,
knowledge is power.
Exactly.
But it's not truly powerful unless it's applied knowledge.
Exactly. And so it's like, even with all of this, you can be like, oh, I know about polarity, but do we practice it every single day? Oh, I know about submission, but do I actually submit?
So speaking on that, let's go into, I know this is not in any of the stuff that we had written down as far as my stuff, but the conversation's good. So what's, from your standpoint on the femininity, what's a good practical starting point for somebody? As in being feminine.
I think you have to look at the spaces to where your why on, like, why am I not soft? Why am I not relaxed? Why am I not, okay, what are my things in me? And yeah, they could be influenced by unhealthy relationships or childhood.
Right.
But it's like, where's the work that I need to do? Because I think I've talked about this before, and I talked about it a while ago on the podcast, well over a year ago, was like, in my divorce, I wasn't just determined to divorce well, which obviously we don't believe in divorce except for the four things and with accountability, but and that I was going to put in a ton of work to make sure that I was not only healed, but living well, and that I was in a biblical feminine place, because, you know, there is a difference. And what did that look like to be soft, to be open? And I do believe that a lot of women think you need to be in a relationship to do that, but it's like, no, you can actually be that single. You could be that in process, but is it magnified and better and how it's supposed to be with someone? Of course.
Yeah.
But there's a difference. Like, you can tell as a man observing women, like, if they're in their masculine or their feminine.
This is very true.
You know? So it's like...
But I think for a man to observe that, you have to be in your masculine.
Yeah.
Because if you're not, you don't see it.
And that's for women. I can tell in 5 seconds how, if someone, and for me, it's more so I'm like, oh, he doesn't lead. Do you know what I mean? Like, or no, you know.
But, so, that's all great. But for somebody that, let's say somebody's in a relationship.
Yeah.
How can a woman show up in their relationship to push their man to be further in their masculine or stay in their masculine? Like, what does that look like for you when you show up daily?
I think that it is so important that we're letting you be a man. Like, I see you as a man, you get to be a man in full, and I have nothing to do with that, minus being my full woman self, right? And so I think that when we're soft and receptive and we're nurturing, not mothering, because there's a big difference. And I think that's a big part, is like, I'm not here to teach you, to tell you, to remind you, to, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just here, and I want to support that, and I like admire that in you, but I'm not here like, you need to do this, you need to do, you know what I mean? Like, no, like, so I think it's seeing you as a man and truly being in a place of admiration of that. It's like the difference between, for a woman anyways, like, I can be passing by a flower and be like, oh, that's a flower, cool. Like, I saw the flower, but did I really like, oh my gosh, look how beautiful this is.
Really stop and smell it and get caught by the person at their home?
Yeah. So, and then you just say, hi, I'm just smelling your flowers.
just happened a couple days ago.
It did. But he was really into it.
Yeah.
So that worked out. So all that to say, it's really that, like, admiration, I think, which is a feeling and a frequency more than I might not always say. It's like, I can tell you with my eyes.
Oh, yeah. You tell me with your body language.
Right.
Like, it doesn't even have to be eyes.
Yeah.
I know, because we've built such a good connection.
Yeah.
That I know just by the way you lay down next to me, or you walk in the home, the way that you potentially could kiss me. Like, there's so many things that when you are completely polarized and you have that connection, you'll know instantly. Because I think as a man, that's just a natural sense of, like, that's your security side of, like, okay, something's off.
Yeah.
And you should have that. Like, I learned, this is nothing to do, I guess it does kind of a way, but an analogy, like when I was in the military, being a police officer and being in Iraq and stuff like that, you always had to be aware of your surroundings. Mm-hmm. And you had to learn how to read people and kind of see what was going on, what was moving, what the moving parts. And a lot of police officers will tell you the same thing, where they have their back to the walls, they know every exit, like you're aware of your surroundings. And I think in a relationship, you should take the same approach of knowing what your partner is like, so when things change, you're like, all right, something's off.
Yeah.
And you don't have to come with all the words, and I typically don't. Like, it's just a matter of, like, hey, what's up, and then letting you talk, because I want, for me, go answering that same question, like a practical way for a man to show up is what I said. Like, a woman wants to feel secure more than she actually needs the security. So it's like just being and knowing and asking that question, like, hey, what's up? Like, don't be the fixer all the time. Don't be the helper. I don't know the guy's name from Wreck-It Ralph. I was gonna say Felix the helper, I think it is, or the fixer. Don't be that.
Yeah.
Just be. Yeah. Just be still. Ask that question.
Yeah.
And if your wife is truly surrendered and safe and secure, you'll get everything.
Yeah. Well, and it's feeling into the need and anticipating a need, which takes time. Like, I think it's like versus, which I do think it's healthy and amazing for us to ask, like, hey, what do you need right now? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's healthy, but I think over time, especially if you are polarized and you know someone's body language and you know their all those things, it's more so like, can I anticipate and can I meet a need without words? You know what I mean? Like, you know what, I can tell this, I should just make you a snack. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, I know this, I should just give you a hug. Do you know what I mean? Like, where we're not needing to always ask. Not that there's anything wrong with asking, because clarity is super important. And I think it's as important to ask as it is to share your fears and your feelings. I think they're both valuable, but really it's when we can be in tune and you can read energy. Yeah. More than I don't need to tell you. You know what I mean? So
we had that happen over the weekend. Yeah. Between us.
Yeah.
Where I just knew. Like, but like I said, I have a good sense of your body language, your energy, because for you to be down is like few and far in between, because you're very energetic, very passionate, and very out there. So it's like, all right, something's up. Because even in your body language, you're passionate. Like, the way you carry yourself, so I can see that, and it's like, okay, what's up, or what we both enjoy the most, and for me especially, just melts me, is like when you come up behind me and just hold me, and I do the same for you, and then like it just that sense of security, even as a man, like to have a wife that loves you so much that she's got your back. Like, if you want to go, they've always said it too, you want to go far, like find you a woman that's going to push you, because we're meant to be together, and we can't, as men, we can't go at this alone. We're a bunch of cavemen, like just wanting to beat drums and rocks and everything. So it's like, that softness that comes from a woman that can push you so much further in your walk, in your business, and whatever you're doing. Like, it's truly amazing.
Yeah, but that's where, because you want to be respected, and you are respected and supported, right? And so that's empowering in itself. Yeah. And then this is a Christian podcast, but true feminine women want to be well fed and well effed. And so
I was not ready for that one.
And so there's that. And
yes.
And the reality is, as a woman to woman, like, you can tell if a woman is well loved and well and well fed. So, man, this is who I am.
Yes.
This is who God made me. God bless.
And God made us for that. We're designed specifically for that.
Yeah. Hello, biologically.
And we've talked about this too. Yeah. Biologically, a man is a giver and a woman's a receiver, even in that sense.
Exactly.
So,
yeah,
we're designed for that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so that's where you as a woman feel that, and you're radiant in that. But then there's the side of, like, you as a giver, right? Me as a receiver. And I think that's even in polarity, even in masculinity, femininity. It's like, I'm not a provider.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm wired for. I'm a receiver. And you're a giver and a provider. So it's even just, again, allowing that space of, I see you as a biblical masculine man, and I adore and admire these things that are in you and who God made you. Yeah. And so that is empowering versus emasculating. I don't micromanage you. No. So that's another, like, which I think all that just goes with mothering and control.
Yeah.
You know, so it is not our place to mother, to micromanage, to control, but to be nourishing, yes, 100%. Right. And I think that's a pretty fine line for people. But I think when there is that respect and surrender, and I'm not uptight and stressed, right? That allows you space, because you're not like, oh my gosh, like...
Well, yeah, that's that relaxed space that we talked about.
Like, you're so intense, you know? Or like, you're so stressed out. You're so... You know what I mean?
That's why the bedtime at 9 works.
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. Okay? We go to bed at 9. And we're up by 5:36-ish.
Yeah, I've been struggling with that one lately, but yeah.
But we're well rested.
For sure.
And even as a man, like, I have to be well rested to be able to show up.
Yeah.
So I can't not be rested and then try to go to work and do whatever I have to do, and then come home and give you guys the leftovers of who I am. Like, no, I need to be able to show up throughout the whole day.
Yeah.
And looking at time, since I have my appointment here in a little bit, because we went off from the beta to masculinity, but it was such a good conversation I didn't want to stop it. Going back to my transformation. I was gonna say transition. That's funny, but I was like, transformation.
No, let's not have a transition.
No, that's why I was like, no. But we was gonna say the same thing. Man.
Okay, so you have a revelation. You're like, oh my gosh. And then obviously Christ and salvation play a role into that.
So after my second marriage, in that marriage, I was a yes man. I had no backbone. I didn't stand up to things. I was in that phase where it was just like, cool, whatever. I don't want to fight. I don't want to do these things. Get divorced. And then, kind of got back into church, and then I got around close to the end of 2021. I got with a therapist.
Yeah.
Phenomenal therapist, and she's like, "Hey, Mike, I think you're codependent." And I was like, "I don't even know what that means." Like, so she's like, "I'm gonna send you a book," and I was like, "Okay." She's like, "But it's got Bible verses in it and scripture and stuff," and I was like, "That's fine. I'm Christian."
Yeah.
Like, I was Christian, but I wasn't a follower of Christ. I wasn't in church. I wasn't doing the things.
Yeah.
I go through that process with that book, and man, the work that you have to put in through that book made me do this a lot. It takes you back to childhood, like working through all that by asking questions. And I'm glad that I had the therapist to walk me through it. I think it's different. If I didn't have her to help me through this process, like, I would have just done the book and been like, oh, just checking the box, reading the things, like,
sure.
Because, like, there was times, like, it makes you think, but in those moments, in that like thinking back to that, your brain doesn't want to push past that boundary or anything like that. So yeah, I would write things down, and then I'd have like every week I'd meet with her and have a conversation. We'd go over everything, and it just pushed me further into what that was and what that looked like. And I was like, oh man, I gotta cry again? Like, I already did when I was writing all this. Like,
yeah.
So phenomenal woman. And if anybody wants that book too, it's called Love Is a Choice.
And what was the other one? Was No More Mr. Nice Guy?
That's the one I read on my own.
Yeah.
Like, but that was just last year that I got them. But the workbook, this is an actual workbook that works through things. The No More Mr. Nice Guy is just about being that.
Yeah.
Really worked through that to where it pushed me. And that's when the revelation came, and I was like, I can't do this alone. I'm trying to do life alone. Like, I've been in church, I've done all these things, and I was like, I can't. Even after 2018, when I almost took my life and God spoke to me and gave me purpose, I was like still trying to do life alone. And it wasn't until going through this process that I was like, I've been running at this alone.
Yeah.
And I can't. So February of 2022, I go, like, before that, obviously I sent the Father's house a message saying, you know, it's time, and I ended up getting baptized. But then even after that, church, I fall back into the world a little bit, and I was like, you fall back into that, and it's like, I don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And I was always striving to do something more and something better for myself. And my daughter, at the time being single, was like, I just want more. And so I just had to continue going back, and then I'd isolate, as most men do. And it wasn't until last year, I think last year was probably more, I was more inundated with the red pill stuff, but I saw that even through after my baptism.
Yeah.
That, thankfully, I took that season to go to the Valley and really heard on Mother's Day the femininity sermon that Pastor Jeremy talked about, and then on Father's Day the biblical masculinity side of things. Like, completely opened my eyes to a whole nother world. Like, yes, you can live in this red pill world, but there's still most red pill men are still passive aggressive and do all these things, and womanizers and chauvinistic and all that. Like, and that's not who I was. I was never raised that way. Like, I'm thankful for the two moms that I've had that raised me to respect women. Yeah. And not only that, seeing all the abuse in the home, like, was something that I never wanted to do. Right. Because of that. Because of how much I loved my moms, that I didn't want that. Yeah. So that pushed me out of that red pill side of things and more into that biblical masculinity and living that life, and then try to be that example for my daughter of, like, this is what a man should be like. And I'm so thankful that through our marriage that we can be that example because of who we are and how we carry ourselves and we walk. She better not knock the camera over. So that's been my transformation of, like, growing up not having everything and living in the free will of God that he gives us, but yet there was always a calling. And obviously through purpose with veterans and kids, like, now has evolved into men, like, wanting to help more men. I've been able to push through all that and really get to the root of it all and getting back to the image of Christ. Yeah, for sure. Which I know we're running out of time, but I think this is a super important question, baby, is what would you say is the major things you've noticed in yourself, like the difference between being a beta and being a biblical man, and also being inverted and being polarized? Like, what are the main things? Which I know that probably could be a whole episode in itself, but I'm just saying, like, what do you notice within yourself and within your life making that transformation? Which it's a journey. We're going to continue to heal. We're going to continue to learn things. That's our life in Christ, you know, but what are those major differences of going from being a yes man, you know, a nice guy, a beta, to being a biblical masculine man? You know, whether that's just for yourself, and then the other side is being obviously in a marriage that has polarity and that sees you as a man versus whatever the other is. You know, so what are those, like, major things for you? Big thing is mindset. the shift from being like this passive aggressive victim to owning up to your own responsibilities and the things that you have to do is huge in itself. So the biggest thing for me is mindset. Yes, I still have things that I suffer with that I'm healing through.
Yeah.
But it's a lot faster to be able to get through that as opposed to in the past and sit and wallow and days on end like not doing anything because of that.
Yeah.
And then through the marriage as well, like the support and the respect that there is like, I don't want to fall back into that. Like, you deserve more, so I want to give more and provide more and do the things that we have set out for ourselves. We have goals and dreams that we want for ourselves and our family, where it's like, dude, if you're in that place and being that bait and that victim, like, you will never have the things that you guys want. So you better get up off your A and get to work and do the things that you need to do. Has been the biggest thing because of that respect and the support that I want to do it more.
Yeah.
It's not a thing of like, oh, I have to go out and do it. Like,
sure.
I actually want to get up and do these things.
Yeah.
And being able to do that. And then even thinking like outside of just us.
Yeah.
The way I show up, like, I have men tell me like, dude, you're so strong. You have a powerful heart. Like the heart of God that you have. And like, you walk into a room and it's like your presence is felt. And that's something that I've had to work on because I do want people to know, like, and it's not even about me.
Sure.
Like, I just want people to see Christ in me.
Yeah.
Anytime I walk in the room.
Yeah.
And that power and that authority for me comes from Christ.
Right.
Because if I'm walking with my head down and my shoulders down, like, I don't have that power and authority that He's given to me.
Yeah.
And He's instilled in me and put in my heart of who I need to be. So to actually see men recognize that is huge.
For
like,
sure.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
And they're like, man, it's when you speak with authority, like everything that you do, when you're putting in that work and people recognize that, like outside of obviously just us, like, it's like, okay, I'm doing what God has called me to do. Yeah. So having that, and that's all mindset, like, it pushes you to be a better person because other people see that. And then it's like a dependence thing, like they're depending on you to show up. And if you can't show up in that space, which there's gonna be days you can't show up in that space as a man, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, of course.
And I told this to the men last time because I know I'm number one, I'll isolate. Like, that's who I used to be, I'd isolate. And we talked about that at our men's group, and I was like, look, I'm notorious for that. I'll call myself out. But as men, when you're a dull sword, you have to get around other men. Because you can't get sharpened again unless you have some other men lifting you. You can read the word, you can do that, but at the same time, you still have to put in work. And other people have to refine you. And that's why, for a sword to be made, it continues to go back into that fire to strengthen it, to mold it. And it's like, we have to continue doing that work to get that done.
Yeah.
So for me, it's when men see the work that I've put in for myself, I can't do anything but thank God, because that's who's driven me to be the person that I am, to be the man that I am, and that He's called me to be.
Yeah.
And He's called every single man that's out there, and I'm talking to you. He's called you to be that man. He's called you to be a champion and the leader of your home and the leader of your community. Like, do the work, whatever it is, whatever the work looks like for you, do the work, because at the end of the day, everybody needs us. And it falls back to the society. Everything falls on our shoulders. And that's why we're made with broad shoulders, is to carry these burdens and carry this, not for only ourselves, our families, our communities, and to really be pushing to get things done. Like, stop being passive aggressive and stand in the authority that God has put in your heart as a man. Even as women as well, you have an authority in life. Like, live to that authority. To when you walk into a room, people can sense your presence and they know that God has stepped in the room because God lives in you. Like, the Holy Spirit is in us, and that needs to be shown and seen and felt. Like, it's not about me, because I know what God has done for me,
for sure.
and He lives in me. That I want people to see that. So let people see what God has done for you, and stand in your authority and walk into rooms where people look at you and they're like, what? There's something. But it's the Holy Spirit coming out of you.
Yeah, so good. It's good, baby. I love it.
Well, thank you, guys.
Gonna wrap it up.
Yes, I gotta run to an appointment. But we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. there's anything, any other questions, please feel free to ask, reach out.
Yeah.
Men, reach out. I'm here. Whatever I can do to help.
Yeah.
And short plug, starting to build that course. I know it's been asked for the biblical masculinity. There's a course being built that I'm going to be running, and hopefully be here soon for you guys.
Yeah. And I would just say too, whether you're a woman that you just haven't been in a place to let your man lead, you don't see your man as a man, or maybe you haven't been in your feminine. I mean, there can be all the dynamics happening. It's not going to happen overnight. And if you're a man that's having a transition, which I don't like using that word, transformation, a conversion, get people around you that have gone through that, right? Because there's authority in that, there's anointing in that, and it isn't just learning about it, it's being about it, and it's doing something about it every single day. It's consistency, it's intention, and it's whether that is femininity, whether that's for your marriage. And I'm sure that there's women listening that are like, oh my gosh, I wish my husband was leading. That's a very common thing right now. I wish he was in his masculine. My husband's this and this and this. Pray for him and check yourself to see, is there anything that you're doing that might be contributing to that? And maybe it's not, but it's possible. And so I always think it's good to look at that. And as a man, you're like, man, I want my wife to be feminine. I'm the man and she's just in her boss babe. Maybe she is, but maybe there's something that you're doing that's contributing to that as well. So I think it can be both, and it can be definitely a person's thing, but it also can be our thing, or our unhealed things. Yeah. And so, but also it just takes a choice and discipline every single day, because you truly get to decide the quality of your life, the quality of your marriage, the quality of your business, all the things by your daily decisions and actions. Amen. And so I just want to encourage you guys to not just look at the other person, not just look at, oh yeah, it's men, oh, it's women. It's all of us, and we all need Christ, and we all need to be transformed and healed. So that is all. Love you guys.